We think that tocotrienol help people to lose weight, not in and of itself a weight loss product, but the metabolism is so out of kilter, came back to kilter, inflammation is reduced, and therefore the adjustment of the body in the weight loss. I can say. So if people want to say, do I lose weight or not? If they say so black and white, then I say we saw patient lost weight at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So seemingly is also sustainable.
The information provided in this podcast is educational and not intended to diagnose or treat medical conditions.
Are you struggling with bloating, gas, constipation, and fatigue, but don't know what's causing these problems? The Gut Health Reset podcast with Dr. Anne-Marie Barter dives deep into the root causes behind these issues that start in the gut. This podcast will give you the knowledge you need to heal your gut and reset your health.
Dr. Tan, thank you so much for being here today. I am super excited to have you on the podcast here. And you're talking a lot about some nutrients that a lot of people do not talk about. So what got you interested in research on vitamin E?
Vitamin E, thank you for inviting me. Vitamin E have interest off again, on again, off again, on again. But in my early days, when I was a professor at the University of Massachusetts, I was very fascinated with lipid-soluble vitamin, such as the E, A, K, and D. And then A was the well-known one back in the 1930s and 40s, and then K soon after, they kind of disappeared. And then E came up in the 1970s and 80s, petered away in 2000 because of studies that showed that vitamin E could potentially even be harmful. And then D came back, and then now K came back after D. So E is kind of like a little bit submerged from water, but my interest has been in it because I'm always interested in lipid-soluble vitamin, and E is one of them.
Got it. That sounds great. So we'll come back to some of the studies here, but I first want to hear about why vitamin E is important for the gut.
Okay, the gut. In the gut, if you hear of any gut inflammatory bowel syndrome, Crohn's disease, and these things, the cause of these disease may not be 100% known, but some of the symptoms of this disease are often known, and that oftentimes you hear the word is inflammation, because the bad bugs would go up and the good bugs go down, serious inflammation. Fully as an antioxidant. So when something is a serious antioxidant, the inflammation would be contained, and therefore it would be, in that sense alone, it will be exceedingly good for people that have gut problems.
How does it work with, so you mentioned some of the inflammatory bowels. Has there been any research associated with IBS and vitamin E?
Yes, the one that I can think immediately of three. One would be somebody is studying a precancerous condition of polyps. So they have this kind of like an IBS, where it's a little bit off on the site of polyps, which is precancerous. And they saw that when they did that, the polyps size and the polyps reduction is much better reduced, and then the polyp did not go to cancerous condition. In another study, it's clearly IBS induced colon cancer, and they saw that the severity of the colon cancer in the animal is reduced. So those, and then the third one, my colleague in Texas did this when they gave people a tocotrienol vitamin E, not tocopherol, tocotrienol vitamin E. The good bugs go up and the bad bugs go down. So there is a balance there. So in that sense, I see this very positive for the influence in the gut microbiome.
Wonderful. Because we know that some of those cases, any of the inflammatory bowels, it has been linked to nutrient deficiency. And that is absolutely fascinating about the polyps. That's absolutely fascinating.
I know this is very literally very anal in this. Some people have nipped off the soft gel and apply it anally into it. We have no such study like that. We only gave the animal oral dose, and it can help like this. But they were encouraged by a comment that I made in the interview to a group. I don't remember the group now. They focus on colitis, and they were saying, I said that in most of this vitamin E, because it's lipid soluble, you take it with food so that it absorbs, with only one exception. And the exception is if you have a colon problem, you may not want all of the vitamin E tocotrienol to be absorbed. Instead, you let it partially not absorb. So you slime through the colon, and in that way is able to dermatologically contact with the colon. So they picked it up and then they apply it suppositorily. I was amazed. I did not ask them to do that, but clearly these are people who suffer from serious condition. They apply. So I don't know where that application is going, but probably in another half year, I will learn from the outcome of that application that they're planning to do.
So something interesting that I do in practice, which is along these same lines, is I give a vitamin E suppository anytime there's bleeding or hemorrhoids, and it just turns it right around. So
Wow.
we do vitamin E
You do that
suppositories.
anyway? Okay. So
Yeah.
so I would say that in animal study we have done this, Anne-Marie, and it looked like it is very potent. Of course, a more simplistic thing would be you have the patient take the tocotrienol purposefully, almost against my good judgment, without a meal on an empty stomach. And therefore, this lipid soluble nutrient will not be normally absorbed. Some of them will still be more like 10-20%. Rather than 50-60% absorbed. So therefore, the 90% not absorbed will slime to the intestine and the gut, and in that way is able to, in contact, help the gut health.
Yeah, you're right. It's amazing. It does really work. So I know everybody is working on also trying to look as young as they possibly can. So how does vitamin E help us with aging?
Okay, in the question you have, maybe by intent or not, is partly loaded. When people say that they take vitamin E, they usually refer to skin health, and a lot of skincare product uses it. But then your question also went deeper to ask about aging. I'll answer the aging one in this way, and then you can apply to the skin and elsewhere. Each person of roughly 130 to 180 pounds, I'm averaging like that. In each person's weight, we have about 38 trillion cells. That's a big number. 38 trillion cells approximate to 5,000 times the population of the Earth. Help us to contain the idea a little bit. And each of those cells look something like a bean shape. And it has a cell wall that contains the nucleus and then other things inside like mitochondria for energy, all these things. For each cell to work well, the cell wall has to be fully functional, where nutrients go in and then the waste would go out. And in so doing, I exemplify this as a proper gated community, a community of organelles inside. But if the gated community is not functioning well, the cell will begin to age. It doesn't really die. It begins to age and it becomes partially dysfunctional. I know many people explain anti-aging differentially. I try to explain it very simplistically and it helps. On the cell wall now, 80% of the cell wall is actually fat. So when people say that they have 25-30% fat, yes, they can hold on to their love handle or the butt like that. But more than half of those fat, they cannot see that is in the cell wall. Now that I explained this, how do I bring it back to the anti-aging thing? If you think of the three main food groups, protein, fat, and carbohydrate, I don't want any of them to get oxidized. And everybody said that their thing is an antioxidant. I'll tell you how to cut the chase of the meaning of antioxidant that is critical. Yes, it is true. I don't want my fat, carbohydrate, and protein to get oxidized. But of these three major groups, the easiest thing to get oxidized is fat. If you drive past a roadkill on a summer day, that smell. If you have a stick of butter on a hot summer day, come back 2 hours, you smell the stick of butter, that smell. So if you have a hunk of steak out there or something like that, it doesn't smell. Eventually, it will go bad. And even the hunk of steak that go bad, the first part of the steak that go bad will actually be the oxidized fat. So all this to say, the lowest line fruit of things that go bad first would be the fat. Therefore, when you come back to the cell wall, 80% is fat. I care most that the fat would go bad so that the gate will not work properly and then the nutrient wouldn't go in. Now that I caught your audience attention, more than 90% of the antioxidant that land onto the cell wall, they are vitamin E molecule. Yes, CoQ10 is good. Yes, carotenes are good. And yes, resveratrol and EGCG, all these are antioxidant, lutein, astaxanthin, but none of them land on the cell wall as well as the vitamin E molecule. So in the 1980s, there was a famous professor. He extracted all the antioxidant in the cell wall, and not surprisingly, more than 90% of those antioxidants in the cell wall are vitamin E molecule. So therefore, vitamin E is good to help in anti-aging because they protect the cell wall so that the cell will perform the proper function. That's it. So if the audience capture this and nothing else, then you gain the most and the simplistic form of what vitamin E ought to do in the human body.
How do we know if we're deficient in vitamin E? And then when do we start to become deficient, like based on our age?
Okay, I think this one I have to go. All of us know vitamin E as an antioxidant, and we take it to protect our body. It is already off a bit from the original discovery. Alpha tocopherol was known to perform a bodily function, and then because of that, it became the superstar status of vitamin. And it just go from the letter, and then E was not taken, and therefore it became vitamin E. But much of the audience, including myself initially, did not know. Alpha tocopherol became a vitamin not primarily because of its antioxidant property, though it is an antioxidant. It became a vitamin because it helped the fetus to full term. And I repeat this. It helped the fetus to full term. So therefore, vitamin E as about 15 milligram as alpha tocopherol is needed in a prenatal vitamin for that reason alone. However, since the discovery exactly 100 years ago by two pediatricians from UC Berkeley, that have long been forgotten. No, few people know vitamin E as a birth vitamin, which in fact it is as a vitamin, but it's known mostly as an antioxidant, which it is also. The antioxidant piece is this. We don't make vitamin in a human body, and vitamin E is made by the plant, particularly the plant that produce oil and fat. Therefore, vitamin E is gotten from soy and corn because soy and corn contains a lot of fat and is protecting the oxidative damage. So you see, if you clock it in and say, aha, if the plant make vitamin E to do that, and if we take vitamin E, it should protect our fat. That's it. If we got that, that's a good concept. It's not what is known for as a vitamin, but it is. So now you ask the question, how do we know we have enough vitamin? When a person does not have enough vitamin E, their skin is patchy and very dry, like that. But that other could be symptoms of vitamin C deficiency and other things as well. But that's the vitamin E. But by the time you get your skin very dry and patchy, Dr. Barter, then it's already quite late. So we want to know it sooner. And the sooner would be an alternative and forward-looking a chiropractic physician like that, like yourself. You do blood work. when you do blood work, you look for inflammation, you look for oxidative damage to the fat, and sometimes people look at the integrity of the red blood cell in the blood work. When they see that not doing well, then they say, okay, this person could be low in vitamin E. So usually that kind of vitamin E they're referring to is alpha tocopherol, which 95% of the vitamin E you find on the shelf is that. I'm hoping that in this talk, I'll be able to bring to the audience attention a new narrative, not the popular tocopherol, but the lesser known tocotrienol that clearly have differentiated functions from tocopherol. So hopefully I answer your question in part.
So just one thing that I think is so interesting is to get a baby to full birth weight. I'm seeing more and more kids be put on growth hormone. Was that a vitamin E deficiency initially, potentially? Because that's very, very common these days.
There is a hormone deficiency connection to vitamin E, but I have not seen that link very strong. The link to vitamin E is that when the fetus is growing, the fetus is one of the few a few life form, not organ, because they're already organistic. The few life form that grow even faster than a tumor cell. That's not the kind of discussion you want to talk to an expectant mom. The tumor like that, a cancer grows rapidly, but the fetus grow faster than a tumor. And in the growth of the fetus, the cell multiply like mad. So if the cell multiply like mad, the cell wall is growing like mad, like this, and the vitamin E is in the cell wall. So when you have the cell going like mad, you have to have enough vitamin E there to protect the cell wall. Same idea like that. So, however, when it comes to tumor, it does the exact opposite. So when you have the cell wall growing like, remember the tumor also growing like mad? And when you add those tocotrienol vitamin E, it will directly kill the tumor cell. That I know you're probably not thinking about this when you were talking about tocotrienol. That we found almost stunningly unusual of tocotrienol vitamin E. It directly go into the cell wall and it actually cause a pro-oxidant effect, and then it kill the tumor cell, whereby when we treat it to the normal cell of the patient, then it didn't do normal cell other than as an antioxidant.
Right. So there's been some recent news articles that have come out that have talked about vitamin E being harmful and dangerous for your health and a supplement to always avoid. What is going on in those studies? What are they discussing?
Thank you for asking that question. Those studies began in the 1990s, and it kind of like died a royal death in 2010, in those 20 years. Because of the fame of vitamin E in tocopherol in the 1970s and 80s, a lot of money were pumped into doing this by the U.S. government, done in Harvard Medical School and the VA hospital. Huge number of people, the physician, health professional study like that. In those studies, they were looking for men and women for cardiovascular health, for women postmenopausal women. They're normally healthy people. But because the study has 40,000 people, they can segregate the study into those who are smokers, not smokers, postmenopausal, not postmenopausal, all kinds of things. Even when they subbed it up, they still have 2,000-3,000 people. So they can do those studies. When those studies came out, they found that people who take 200 milligram or 200 IU, 400 IU, or 1000 IU like that, instead of helping to improve cardiovascular health, it null or at worst increase cardiovascular health. That's not good news. But the worst news is potentially cause breast cancer in postmenopausal women. That's a big alarm bell, and in men even increase prostate cancer and lung cancer on those who are smokers. Immediately the brake was put on. But why is that? My theory is that Those vitamin E that they talk about, first, they are synthetic. They are referring to alpha tocopherol, no tocotrienol. And alpha tocopherol among the vitamin E is the only one that have a transport protein. So now I'm using a new phrase. What is a transport protein? If you think of the nutrient we get in our body, most of that goes through the cell wall to diffusion. Low concentration, high concentration. It diffuses from high concentration to low concentration. You just have a spoon of sugar in your water. You don't stir the water. You can see the wiggly thing. It go from high concentration. That's diffusion, like that. When you have a transport protein, it is not diffusion anymore. It is a rite of passage. Just think of it. You have 1,000 people allowed to go to the Oscar thing. They line up the night before. They just have to wait in line. If you were to be Nicole Kidman, for example, you already have some Oscar like that. They don't wait in line. They just go right through. That's a rite of passage. Transport protein mean that if a compound have a transport protein, they will have a rite of passage. They go right through. Alpha tocopherol is the only vitamin E that have a rite of passage. So when people take 400 milligram or 1,000 milligram, they already take so much of this. Even if by pure diffusion, they would go in fast. But instead, they have a rite of passage. They go in like mad. Nobody know of all this alpha tocopherol when in what happened to them. Now the studies show that it could cause the condition I mentioned to you. So that vitamin E thing just died of a royal death. So I feared in those 1990 and 2000, I was already studying tocotrienol. I'm going to die with this. I'm like the baby with the bathwater thrown away. But I persisted, Dr. Bada, in the last 20, 30 years to do tocotrienol study. We never found tocotrienol to be toxic in all the 20 over clinical trials that we study on the myriad of chronic conditions. I'll just mention them and I'll leave you to decide which one you want to pick it up to say. We study people with dyslipidemia. We study people with pre-diabetes, metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, and a special condition of metabolic syndrome, fatty liver condition, and men and women with overweight and obesity, and finally a whole big class of people with cancer. But mostly these are chronic conditions. We have seen that the different tocotrienol differentiate from tocopherol functions that tocopherol does not do, and we were never able to document a safety issue like tocopherol that you brought to my attention to discuss.
So, what were you seeing when you actually utilize natural forms of vitamin E? Because so many people are afflicted with quite a few of these conditions. But I'm just going to pick out, metabolic syndrome, which is kind of pre-diabetes. You have higher, basically cholesterol, higher blood sugar, as well as you have liver enzymes that have elevated. So
Yes.
those things, and then ultimately, being overweight as well. So how does vitamin E help those two conditions? What are you noticing with that?
We first studied this with people with hypercholesterolemia that didn't have the other condition, and we saw that the cholesterol dropped a bit. But while we were looking at in the lipid panel that you may have from your patient, I noticed, the triglyceride also dropped. So we did more study. The triglyceride consistently dropped. So this is a part. It is a teaching moment. I hope that you allow me to do this. When Professor Gerald Reaven first came up with this metabolic thing, he called it Syndrome X because he didn't know what this was. Gerald Reaven have since retired and passed away from Stanford like that. And when he figured it out, then it became metabolic syndrome. Some of the audience may or may not know it. I met him one time when he was getting an award in American Diabetes Association on his way out to take a flight back to Stanford. He was a little bit not happy that I stopped him, but so he only gave me a one sentence. He said, you walk away with this, then you'll figure out what I mean. So he simply said this: hypertriglyceridemia always precedes hyperglycemia. In short, high triglyceride always come first before you have high sugar. Therefore, people will not become diabetic first in the metabolic syndrome. The triglyceride will go up. That will be the first sign something is going off like that. And we consistently saw the triglyceride go down. So now, with those understanding of metabolic syndrome, so we decided to study people with pre-diabetes. That means they're not diabetic. The sugar is normal high. And we noticed that the liver enzyme drop a little bit, as you indicated. I call the liver enzyme drop a stress enzyme of the liver, they drop. And then, of course, since we're studying inflammation, so we study C-reactive protein. We have done so many of this study. It is yawning to me. I just do it and it always do. So the C-reactive protein drop, but we also measure oxidized fat. Remember, I told you tocotrienol oxide, and the oxidized fat dropped. So we saw that marker drop. Then we decided to study people with fatty liver. They also have metabolic syndrome. It's part of the whole cluster. Here we were doing nuance study. The fat was in the liver. So we actually have ultrasound to map the fat. The fat also egress from the liver. That is really good news. And then in the last study we did, 3-month study, a 6-month study, and finally we did 12-month study. This is so easy to say. Never mind everything I've done before. Just the fatty livers, 3 clinical trials we did is 8 years of my life. Besides all the other stuff that I talked to you before. So I just hone in on just because the last thing we done. In a 12-month study, we directly compare to alpha tocopherol because people ask about alpha tocopherol and the tocotrienol, different group. And the tocotrienol in the alpha tocopherol works. But the tocotrienol worked above that of alpha tocopherol in 2 things. It reduced better the inflammation than that of alpha tocopherol 1. The second one I did not expect. Actually, I noticed this in the 3 and 6 months, but I saw this in 12 months, so I have to accept that this actually worked. I was resisting because I know how people would read the study if I say it, but now I have to say, at least in the 3, 6, and 12 months. These fatty liver metabolic syndrome people that are overweight, they consistently reduce weight. The reduction of weight is typically 10 to 15 pounds. At 3, 6, and 12 months, they consistently lost it, so it's sustainable. So therefore, people is sure to ask me, is this a weight loss product? That's the part that I'm very antsy about. In weight loss product, they usually see something in 4 weeks or less. Well, we don't have data for 4 weeks or less, but we do have data at 3, 6, and 12 months. We think that tocotrienol help people to lose weight, not in and of itself a weight loss product, but the metabolism is so out of kilter, came back to kilter, inflammation is reduced, and therefore the adjustment of the body in the weight loss. I can say. So if people want to say, do I lose weight or not? If they say so black and white, then I say we saw patient lost weight at 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. So seemingly is also sustainable. So that, to me, that is really icing on the cake. I know it's a bad metaphor, but it's actually a good thing. We actually saw this, even though we did not expect this.
So where do we find this natural vitamin E?
Now, okay, if you go on our website, American River Nutrition, or you type my name, Barrie Tan, because I spoke on this so many times, you can easily track me down. We are the only place in the US that make tocotrienol. We extract it from a plant called annatto, this beautiful plant here. The annatto, if you touch it, I pretend to touch it, it stains your finger, and those color from annatto is used for coloring cheese. So I removed the color and discovered the vitamin E, and the vitamin E that I discovered from them, surprisingly, it did not contain any tocopherol, only tocotrienol. And the only other 2 sources I found is from rice and palm. So if you were to go to the store to buy vitamin E, 90% or more of the time, the vitamin E would be tocopherol. So you have to put that aside. you look for tocotrienol vitamin E, and you want it to say annatto. ANNATTO, annatto tocotrienol. But if you really want to hone in on is this the annatto that American River make, we just trade name it Delta Gold, because the main tocotrienol in it is called Delta tocotrienol. We call it Delta Gold. And if you go to my website, they say, oh, buying tocotrienol, we don't sell them because we make them in buckets of 1 ton total or something like that. So, but we'll list all the companies that sell them. If you want some names of how you can buy from Amazon, a very strong and good health professional company is Designs for Health. Design for Health sell this, and they simply just call it annatto E, 150 milligram or 300 milligram. Now, before I pass on to the dosage, I can only mention this in the clinical study. We are not allowed to say it on the bottle. We can send published work. You can go to our website. You can download papers that you can read, or you can download my book here to read yourself. It's free. When we did a normal person, they take anywhere from 100 to 200 milligram, depending on the weight. It's just an antioxidative protection. We did it on people 60 to 65 years old at the elderly stage, and it helped them in the oxidative protection. And then in the pre-diabetes and diabetes study, mild chronic condition is somewhere between 200 to 400 milligram. And then in studies that we have fatty liver and cancer study, they're 600 milligram and higher like that. So, but those are very serious condition. And when you take it, just remember to take it with a meal. And I know before the podcast, you asked me the question. So in the instance for people, they may have gut problem. There may be an exception to the rule. You may purposely want to take the tocotrienol pill on an empty stomach. That means that only 10-20% is absorbed, 80% or so is not absorbed. So you'll go to the gut and probably in contact physically on the outside of the body to help the colon health. But in all other cases, taking it with a meal will be able to enter systemically.
Awesome. And where can people find you and your book?
They can find me in a book here, Barrie, Barrie 10.com. You'll be able to go. Or if you lost that thing, you simply type my name or American River Nutrition, get it.
So, well, thank you so much for being here today. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much. Hopefully your audience will have a learning information from this and have a wonderful weekend. Be blessed.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.